Michael Fanone, welcome to The Daily Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
You have written a book that would have been remarkable even before January 6th happened. You know, you've lived a life in law enforcement. You have a really interesting story in and around law enforcement, but there is no denying that January 6th is a day, you know, that America will probably never forget, and a day that will be etched into your memory forever. Some people have seen the footage, and those who have all said the same thing. It is harrowing, but you actually experienced that. If you wouldn't mind, take me through not what happened, but how you feel about people commenting on that day as if it wasn't a big deal. You know, many people say, it wasn't that bad, it wasn't an insurrection, it wasn't, this was just, you know, it was calm, people need to relax. You were actually there. You were actually one of the people trying to stop those who were trying to come into the Capitol. What was your experience, and how different is it from what people try and claim?
I mean, I remember the brutality of that day like it was yesterday. And hearing people, you know, especially lawmakers, elected so-called leaders of this country, downplay or deny the reality of that day. I mean, to say it's infuriating is an understatement. I mean, it pisses me the off. Yeah.
I don't know what it felt like for you. I mean, you suffered extreme injuries. How are you doing now, by the way?
I mean, I'm good, like physically, mentally. I feel like I've had a lot of time to come to terms with what I experienced that day. But I mean, a big part of writing this book was not just to memorialize what I did, but also what so many other officers did that day. And, you know, there's a lot of them that are out there that are suffering in silence, that didn't get the acknowledgement that I've gotten, and that have kind of been, or at least feel that they've been forgotten.
Because you were one of, I think it was 850 officers who rushed to protect the Capitol during that moment. You were one of the many officers who were attacked by this mob who was rushing in. One of the darkest ironies in some of that footage is you being beaten by a mob where they're holding a Blue Lives Matter flag. And, you know, I've often said one thing that perturbs me in America is how people will use the idea of either the military or law enforcement to further their narrative, but it seems like they don't actually have that same reverence for actual law enforcement or military. You know, you see people, veterans being homeless, or you see law enforcement treated like yourself. Did those people even acknowledge what was happening? Did they see you? Did they acknowledge you as a human? Could you communicate with them, or did it feel like they were going through you at all costs?
I mean, there was a point where, you know, I remember yelling out to the crowd that I had kids, and this is while I was being beaten and struck with a taser. And I did, I think, get through to maybe a handful of the individuals there, and they did try to, you know, offer some level of assistance to me. I mean, I remember at one point they were actually fighting with other rioters to try to prevent them from, you know, continuing their assault on me.
Right.
But, you know, for the most part, I think they just felt like I was an obstacle, and they were going to get through me and any of the other officers that were there trying to protect the building and protect ourselves to, you know, accomplish their goal, which was overturning a free and fair election.
When you look at how lawmakers have responded, you know, in the book you talk about this, and it's been really scary and disappointing to see how lawmakers have spoken either to you in private or to any of the officers who were there, and it seems like the way they responded on that day and the things that they said behind closed doors are very different to what they now say when they're on TV downplaying everything that happens. You know, for instance, you're really critical of Lindsey Graham, for instance, and I'd love to know, has it been strange for you to see him then publicly downplay the event after saying to you, you should have killed these people, and then publicly say it wasn't as bad as everyone says?
Nothing shocks me anymore after all this time that I spent, not only as a police officer for 20 years, but the time I spent on Capitol Hill. I mean, it's unfortunate, I think, not just Republican lawmakers, although they do deserve quite a bit of, you know, the scrutiny that they're getting right now, but lawmakers in general, and how they are indifferent to the people that they are elected to represent and serve. I mean, that was the main takeaway that I got was, people like Kevin McCarthy, Lindsey Graham, a lot of these lawmakers, they saw me as an inconvenience. And they were indifferent to what my experience was and what the experience of many of the other officers that day were.
Right.
And they were indifferent to the experience that, what America is experiencing right now under their half-assed representation.
In the book, you speak to so many of these ideas, and you have a really interesting journey. I didn't know about your history in law enforcement until I read this book, and just talking about your tattoos and the work that you did working undercover narcotics, and how you had the nickname, I think it was the Spider-Man, right?
Yes.
And you were notorious for, I think you were a rock climber. Do you still climb?
I do, yeah.
You still have the skills?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I have the skills, but I give it a shot.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting because you were connected. It was almost it was a double entendre because you were connected, and the people in the community knew you, but you also would climb up to perch yourself for sting operations and to be in the right place for what you were doing. What's interesting is how you talk about law enforcement in the book. It's a longer conversation than just January 6th, and you share some really interesting insights about how you see the failings of American law enforcement and how it is incongruous with what it's actually trying to do. For instance, talking about how to bring down drug rates, drug crimes, drug usage, etc. You don't seem to be pro locking everybody up with every minor infraction. I'd love to know why.
I mean, I learned pretty early on in my career. For me, I aspired only to be a vice officer, to work in narcotics. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was like the pinnacle. I never sought promotion, was not interested in supervising other officers. I can barely supervise myself. So, I mean, for me, the pinnacle of my career was when I went to vice. And like I said, I saw, the idea of going out and going into an area in which, violent crime was prevalent, where open-air drug markets existed, and mm-hmm. locking up hundreds and hundreds of people, that was not solving the problems. It was not addressing violent crime. It was not addressing the open-air drug markets. What I saw was a need for much more surgical, precision strikes, if you will, against very specific individuals who were committing these violent crimes in those neighborhoods. Quality over quantity.
Right.
Unfortunately, whether it was through laziness or, and again, it is complicated. Law enforcement had opted for, we looked at success as a quantity of arrests. How many arrests were made in a mm-hmm. specific area? Mm-hmm. That's how we determined that we were being successful in that area. But it wasn't, as a lot of people might think, it was not fueled by law enforcement officials. That actually came from, our city council and from the mayor's office. I mean, these concepts, I guess to streamline the explanation, you would have citizens would complain about an area in which there was, a large amount of violent crime or drugs.
Yeah.
And then you would have politicians would, receive those complaints and they would forward them on to the police department. And they would want to know, what is the police department doing to address this issue? They want results now. They want officers out there. They want them out there making arrests. And they want to be able to go back to these citizens and say, well, we made these arrests, and that's success. So again, it's not, law enforcement has its role to play, mm-hmm. politicians have their role to play, and citizens have their role to play. The issue is not as simple as I think a lot of people would think. And again, another big point that I tried to make in my book is that I feel like the politicians are failing us in that their role to play is to facilitate positive, constructive conversations between law enforcement and the people that we're charged with serving. And right now, I don't feel like that's what's happening.
It's a really complicated journey, and I think it's revealing, It is honest, and it's a painful account of what you went through on that day. And as you said, with the 800 plus officers who also stepped up. Thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, everybody, Hold the Line is available now.